Have you ever wondered how to keep your Azure environment organized or your cloud costs under control? Or maybe you're struggling to make sense of your growing list of resources. There may be one powerful tool that you're overlooking in Azure: tags. How can you use tags to take control of your Azure environment? Find out on this MS Cloud Bros video. Hey everyone, Jeremy Wallace here, Microsoft MVP certified trainer and solutions architect for Azure. Today we're going to talk about something that's often overlooked in Azure, but if used correctly is a powerful tool for managing your Azure environment, and that's Azure Tags. Yes, tags. So let's talk about tags, but first, if you haven't already, please this video, subscribe to the MS Cloud Bros channel and hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date on all the great new videos that we release on the Microsoft Cloud. So what are tags in Azure? In Azure, they're essentially labels that you can put on specific resources that you create. They're these key value pairs you come up with a name and a value for, and they can essentially be sticky noted to those particular resources. We're here in the Azure portal and I'm creating a resource group. Typically when you create resources in Azure, you're going to see this tags tab. I'll see a lot of people, they'll spin up a resource, then they skip the tags portion. Typically it's because they don't really have a strategy for using tags, or they don't really understand the value that tags can bring to them. But really, used correctly, tags add a ton of management capability and value to your Azure environment. So let's explore that. While we're here, if I'm appending a tag to this resource, for instance, environment, I can select production. And so if I have multiple resources in my Azure subscription that belong to different workloads, maybe I have a production workload, I have a dev test lab workload, I can append those tags to those resources so that I can easily find which resources belong to which use case. And how do you do that? If you go into tags, you can actually see a list of all the tags that you have added to your resources. So if I find environment production and I select that tag, I can see all the resources that have that production tag. So now I can only focus on the things that are production based, or vice versa. If I have stuff that are dev test, I can look at, okay, what are my dev test resources? What's a test machine that I can connect to right now? And then I can help prevent scenarios where you might accidentally shut off something that's in production, or if you just want to focus on what resources do I have that are being used in the dev test environment. So not only does it help with organization, but you can also use tags for understanding your costs better. When you look at cost management, what you're looking at is often a breakdown of specific resources based on the resource type. Here's how much I spent on virtual machines. Here's how much I spent on storage. But if you have different purposes inside your Azure environment, say you have virtual machines with SQL on them dedicated to a specific application that's running there, then you have another set of virtual machines that's part of your Active Directory environment. You have file storage over here. Maybe there's something dedicated specifically to finance. You're not going to quite get that breakdown inside Azure by just looking at the general cost analysis screen. So I actually can come into my cost analysis area here instead of just looking at this general overview of what I spent on the Azure subscription. You have the ability to filter what you're looking at based on tags. So for instance, this cost projection chart here, I can actually group those costs by tag and select the specific tag that I want to filter it. If you do have that environment tag and you want to see how much was spent on production, and you can get that visualization down in these charts too. So you can actually come in here and change this if I want this to be a tag and look at, okay, so this is what my production spend was. Or if you have a purpose tag, you can see, okay, this particular amount of what I spent was used specifically for these applications. So in this particular case, I had a Hyper-V set up in that lab environment. So I know what my associated costs were for just that particular item. So another great use case for tags is in the area of compliance. If I want to make sure certain workloads inside my environment are compliant, with a set of rules, tags are a great way to accomplish that. So how is that done? Let's use with Azure policy. So you can actually create compliance policies that will check for, hey, are these resources following these set of rules? Tell me whether it's compliant or not compliant. And you can even, in some cases, use it to enforce those settings automatically. So we can see an example of a compliance policy here. This particular compliance policy is checking for all of these rules that are set and telling me, hey, these are the resources that are not compliant. You can apply these type of compliance policies to certain tags. For instance, if you have PCI compliance that you need to adhere to in your environment, you have only a certain portion of your Azure environment that's in scope for PCI. So you want to apply the compliance specifically to a set of resources. You have all of those resources with a tag that says PCI on it. And then you can filter your policy specifically for that tag to make sure that PCI environment is following all the rules that it needs to that you have listed out in Azure policy. So Microsoft published a list of minimum suggested tags. So these are tags that they suggest that you use throughout all of your resources in your environment. At the top of that list is workload name, name of the workload that the resource supports. So what this would be for is if you had a particular application or workload inside your Azure environment that had a lot of components to it. For instance, maybe it's a website portal or finance application. It has a backend SQL server or Azure SQL databases. It has a storage, and it has a web part running with a plan, maybe function apps. And so all of these components, it can be hard to identify what components actually belong to the specific application that's running. And so you can use tags to make sure that all of those resources are tagged with that tag. And then you can just look for that tag. Okay, this is all of the resources that are necessary for this application to run. Helps you just to focus on those, not have to hunt and chase down like, oh, there's actually a separate SQL server involved here that we weren't even thinking about. The next one they suggest is data classification. So sensitivity of data that resources have. So they give this example: non-business, public, general, confidential, highly confidential. Again, for compliance reasons, if you want to make sure that, hey, disks are encrypted or you're following certain security protocols for these workloads, having that data classification in there will help you identify how strict of security you need on particular resources that are there. Next one is business criticality. So business impact of the resources or supported workload: low, medium, high, business critical, mission critical. That way, if it's very low, if things are breaking, you have your list of priorities. I'm like, okay, we'll get to that one. That one's low on the list. We need to make sure that these business critical ones are addressed first. Maybe there's cases where it's like, okay, we don't necessarily need to back up this low one. That's something that can just easily be recreated or respun up. So we don't need to have any type of backup plan for that particular resource. Business units, top level division of your company that owns the subscription or workload that the resource belongs to. In smaller organizations, this tag might represent a single corporate or shared top level organization element. They have business unit here. They give examples: finance, marketing, product, XYZ, corp, shared. So if you do have different workloads running an environment for different departments, finance has this application, HR has this application, our IT services have this. You can differentiate all that with tags that will help you understand the cost that each of those business units are spending inside Azure, just to make sure that's appropriately designated on the finance side, as well as understanding who owns this particular product. Operations commitment: level of operations supported, provided for the workload or resource. And the one below: operations team accountable for day-to-day operations. So these two tags show who's the team responsible for the application, and then to what level are they responsible for it? What type of commitment? Are they only making sure that the base virtual machine is running there? Are they actually supporting the application on it? Maybe you have an MSP providing support inside your environment. What are they responsible for? So utilizing these type of tags can make sure that it's called out whose responsibility at what level is for a particular resource. Again, just making sure that you have the necessary information for you to better run, manage, operate, support your Azure environment. And then they have plenty of other tags here. I'll just quickly run through them. Application name, if that's different from the workload name, if there's multiple applications inside the workload, you can use even a more granular tag on top of that. Approver name, you want to say who even approved this resource. So having that put on there, budget required, approved. So giving an example of what's the actual monies that are designated for this application to run. If you have cost center tracking that you need to, you can actually append that the cost center associated with that resource. Disaster recovery, what level of disaster recovery needs to be in place for that particular resource, mission critical essential, and then end date of a project. If a resource only needs to be there temporarily and the project has a projected end date, you can tag that on there. So maybe you can have some stuff automatically in place to remove those resources at a certain time. Or if you're just doing a general audit later on, you can see, hey, this resource looks like it shouldn't be needed anymore. I'll contact the team and see if I can delete that. Environment, again, that's one that we took a look at earlier. Prod, dev, QA, stage, test, just making sure that those different workloads that belong to those different types of environments are properly called out. So you can see whether this is a test machine, if this is being used for quality assurance, or if it's actually production and super critical. Azure region, just another great information to place on there that you can see on the tag. So you can see, hey, what are all my resources that are in West US 2 or East US? If you just want to see, okay, what's my particular spend for just a whole region? Requester name, who's the person that asked for this resource in the first place? Service class, so service level agreement. So if you have SLA for a particular workload, you can mark that on there. Get handy in cases where you have MSPs working inside an environment. And then start date of project. When did this project even begin? So it helps you understand how old that environment is. Again, especially if it's something you look at later on down the road, you want to know, when were we even using this? It helps answer those type of questions. So again, this is Microsoft's minimum suggested tags, and then below that is the common tagging examples that they called out that a lot of organizations use. So now the question is, how, with all this list of tags, am I really expected each time to go through and create all these tags every time I'm making a resource? And do I have to have a paper next to me that says, I'm like, okay, here's the 6 tags that I need to make sure I have on this resource when I create it. And then here's the values that I need to use for those tags. Doing all of that manually can be a pain. And so definitely that is not the approach you want to take. Anytime you have stuff like this, you want to take a more automated approach. And that's where we can use Azure Policy. So if we dive back into the Azure portal here, I can go to policies. You can actually create a specific policy that automatically appends these tags to your resource. So I created a custom policy here that I called append required tags, and I'll show you what that looks like here. I'm just going to edit the definition. So I created this, I called it append required tags, and then I put in the description just what we went through. Those minimum suggested tags that they hear. I just took these tag names and these descriptions and I put that into the actual description here for the policy. And then I have this under the tags category so I can easily find this policy later. And then under the policy rule, I'll walk through what that shows here. So this is checking if these tags exist. So it's checking for a tag called workload name. If it's false, data classification. If it's false, business criticality. If it's false. So all of those suggested tags that we looked at here, I have it in here. And so it's checking if these are false. If these tags do not exist on the resource, then append them. So add them to the resource. And then what value to add them with. And so the value that I'm putting by default is just default. The reason I did that is because when you spin up a resource, the values that particular resource has is going to change depending on what resource it is. However, you want the tags, these list of tags that are going to be on it, are all going to be the same name tags. You're always going to have a workload name, a data classification, a business criticality, a business unit. Just the value of what those tags are going to change. So what we're doing with this is automatically add the tags, just throw on a default value. And after the resource is created, I can go back to the resource and then add the actual value that I want. So that way I don't have to recall from memory while I'm creating the resource. Okay, I need workload name. Did I spell that? What was it, all one word together, or was it two separate words? No, I can just create the resource. I can skip that tag section, just like a lot of people normally do. And then as the resource gets created, it's automatically going to add all of these tags to the resource. And now that the resource is created, I can hop into the resource and add the correct value that I want that resource to have. So that's one way to approach it. There are other ways. You can, if particular resource groups, if you have a production resource group, you can say, hey, I want everything in this resource group to have the tag environment production. Or if you want to automatically set those values here, you can set that. Again, this is just one approach. You may want to actually set what the default value is to something more specific. And if you have it applied to a resource group level, you can say anything that's inside this resource group belongs to the specific application. So automatically append workload name finance app to it. Or anything inside this particular resource group has classification highly confidential. Or you can do that at the Azure subscription level. So there's different ways that you can manipulate this for the use case. I'm just showing one here. I just want to set it to a default value, and then I'm going to go after the fact and change it. The nice thing is you can go in to the tags area, like what still has a default tag on it as the value. And you're like, okay, so here's the resources that still have that default that have never changed. I'm going to change it. So again, it's helping you create better control of your Azure environment and get a better reign on it. And it's really up to you on how you want to implement that. What tags here are actually appropriate. Again, Microsoft suggests at least these tags, and I would agree with them. These are very helpful tags to have. Maybe you don't need the operations team, operations commitment part of them, but definitely workload name, data classification, business criticality, business unit. Those are all very great tags to have. And then maybe some of these ones that are down here, disaster recovery or backup, project start date, owner, those type of tags are all great tags to utilize for that management aspect, as well as the cost analysis aspect and the compliance side of things. All right, so let's see this particular policy in action. Again, you may create a different policy that actually has values that you want to put. I'm just going to show you what this one that sets them to a default value looks like. So I'm going to go back out to the actual policy here. I'm going to hit assign a policy so we can see that it's applied at my Azure subscription level, and then what the policy it's using, append required tags, and then what this assignment is named. And then if I want to put in a description, automatically applies required tags to resources, policy enforcement enabled. No parameters in this case. Remediation would be if I had resources that already existed that did not have these tags, and I want it to retroactively go back and add these tags to those resources. I can create a managed identity for that. Otherwise, this will only take effect on new resources that I create, which is fine in this case because the subscription that I have selected has nothing else in it. And the non-compliance message would be if what do we display when it errors out that these particular things don't belong there. In this case, I don't care for a compliance message because this is auto-appending. It's not denying those resources from being created. So I'm going to hit create. All right, so now with the policy assigned, if I go to create a resource, let me just create a virtual network inside the subscription. So I'm using a resource group that's inside the subscription. I'm just going to call this VNet test US. Just going to go with all the defaults. And again, I'm not going to add anything on the screen because we have a policy that's going to automatically append these suggested tags just with the literal word default as the value of the tag. So let's create this resource. Deployment's complete. Let's go to look at the resource. And now we can see right here on the overview page that These tags are all there: business criticality, business unit, data classification, operations commitment, operations team, default, workload name. I can also just go to this tags tab and see here. So now we know what the tags are that are on it, and I can change these to actual values that I want to use. Now you can use a separate Azure policy to enforce what are acceptable values for these tags. So for instance, data for classification. If I want data for classification just to be general, highly confidential, those type of labels, I can prevent somebody from making up some whole other data for classification label in here. They're like Bob's Fun Data. We don't want that label. That doesn't adhere to all the things that we want to search on or have compliance to. So I want to restrict what those values are. So I can use a separate Azure policy that says for this tag, these are the acceptable values, otherwise deny. These are just, if you've used that value before, it'll pop up as a suggested value here. Otherwise, if you've never used that tag before with any type of value, then you won't see anything. So you'll have to actually add them in. Workload name, I'm going to use, this is going to be for my Active Directory environment, this virtual network. The cloud team is going to be the team responsible for it, for the full operations of it. Data classification is going to be confidential. This is shared. All of the business units are going to use this Active Directory environment, and it's mission critical. So it needs to be up and it needs to be supported right away. This is key to our operations. So then I can hit apply. Those are the proper tags that are set on this particular item. And then now again, I can go and search based on those tags. Business unit, shared. I can see everything that belongs to that particular shared unit. If I want to look at what confidential stuff I have in the environment, I can again pull that up. Here's all my resources that have that confidential label. Same thing with the cost analysis. Now I can separate these. So that's Azure Tags. Again, a tremendously powerful tool if you use it right, and I highly recommend that you use it. Take the time to figure out what tags you want to use, create the policies to enforce them. It's going to help you out in the long run as your environment grows, as you have other people come in and help you work on that environment, as you want to understand the costs as a business associated with different components that you have there. Do yourself a favor and make use of Azure Tags today.